Today we'll try to cover the following 4 areas: research process, the elements of research, the inductive and the deductive logic, and the research ethics and the theory thereof. So this is what we have planned to do today. But as is always the comment I make, in all these sessions that we're going to have, if you've got any question to ask, not related to any of these 4 areas, you are welcome to do so. You are not necessarily discouraged from asking any question on any element of research. It's just to guide my comment and my interaction with you today. So feel free to jump in and ask relevant questions that are of concern to you or of interest to you, because there's no formula in terms of how we want to run this process. So, but it's just that this is now the areas that I thought for this purpose we can focus on them. Now, when you move around any institutions or of research, or any company or any research institution or any university, and you talk about research, they will talk to you about the research proposal. You have to compile or come up with a research proposal. So there's many examples of a proposal, a research proposal. But what we're trying to do here really is just to demonstrate the common elements that you may have in different research proposals. So this is not limited to a particular institution or a particular author. It's just that you have to find something that at least you can relate to when you do a proposal. So some of you might be at the stage in your academic career where you already have developed a proposal. So this is just an opportunity to look at whether you went through those steps. Some of you are just about to. So this is an opportunity to look at whether or not this is going to assist you. And some of you have really just put the whole process in abeyance. And maybe this is what can trigger interest in you. So there's different stages at which we are, and for that I appeal for your indulgence when we engage on this. So we have in our own literature now, we have already decided that we're going to have this kind of schematic presentation which shows the 7 steps of research. These are just 7 steps of research that we are proposing, but there could be 8, there could be 4, there could be, so it doesn't really matter, depends on which author you are relying on. I've adapted this from an author down there which is part of the slide, because I found it maybe user friendly for this purpose that we are involved in. Now, when you do research, the first thing that we would like to hear is what is the problem that you want to solve? In other words, what is it that you're interested in? A problem that you want to solve, or questions that you want answers on, or whatever. You'll have a topic or a problem. So how you formulate is something that is really of interest to you, or it's a problem that you really want to find a solution to, or so there's you have to have a problem or a question or a concern that you are curious about and you want to solve or deal with. And once you have then identified the question or the problem that you want to solve or the question that you want to answer, the next logical process then is what aim or what is the goal of your research? This is the aim or the goal in relation to the problem or the concern or the question that you want to answer. So you look at that and you say, this is my aim, this is my goal, this is what I want to address. Now when you've got an aim or a goal, then the next thing we ask or we expect of anyone who's conducting research, doesn't matter at what level of expertise you are in, beginner, intermediary, experienced, whatever, then you have to undertake what we call literature review. Research calls literature review. Here, you go out, you identify, hypotheses and assumptions or you also go and see what others have done in relation to what you are doing. So you basically comparing and reading and getting more information about what you are doing. So if it's a phenomenon that you want to study or the problem, you may find that you are not the first person to do it. So because you may not necessarily be the first person to be doing it, you want to know what others have said. Doesn't matter whether they agree with you or whether they disagree with you or whether they don't have any opinion, but at least you need to go and find out what others have said about that which you're interested in. It's more likely that you'll find some people that have studied what you are studying, when you do literature review. And once you have done so, the next process that you will find in research, very common, is what you call research design. Now, research design, in simple terms, means a plan. Now, here it's where you then develop a plan to address the problem and or its sub problems. So here you come up with a plan as to how are you going to address the problem, or how are you going to answer the questions that you are investigating. So you come up with a research plan. So that plan is called research design technically. So when you hear the word research design, then you know it's a plan. This is where you're going to hear a lot about your different research approaches, such as your qualitative, your quantitative, your mixed methods, your sampling strategies, all that, goes into some of this plan. Now, once you then have put a plan in place, the expectation then is in research proposal is that then you'll have data collection. Here, what you do is that you demonstrate through a plan how you're going to collect and organize data relating to the problem or to the sub-problems or to the topic that you are interested in. Now, here you outline in the research proposal, you already outline your data collection. So what are the mechanisms, the instruments, the tools that you're going to use to collect data? So how are you going to get data to be collected? This is what you expect to see when you deal with data collection. And remember, we said data not analyzed and interpreted, it's meaningless in research. Just is unhelpful to have just data for the sake of it. So you then move into a place where we then say, how then do you analyze the data that you have collected? So the analysis of data related to the problem and its sub-problems is also one of the steps that you build in your proposal, and you then have to demonstrate at this level what instruments, what techniques, what mechanisms are you going to use to analyze the data? Because you've collected it, now you must analyze it. And the last phase of it is the research report. Now here you demonstrate application or interpret the meaning of the data as it relates to the problem. So basically you look at the data that you have collected and you analyze it, then you make sense of it. What does it mean to us, when you present it? So it has to be then formulated in the report. Now, when you report on the whole process of your process as you shall have undertaken, that research report then sort of characterizes and summarizes the work you have done. So the whole plan, when you report on it now, becomes your research report. So you tell us what was your aim of the research, or what was the problem, what was the aim, how did you do literature, what was the design, how did you collect data, how did you analyze it. So as you relate all that, you're compiling what is called a research report, which basically, as I said, is an application of or the interpretation of the meaning of the data that you have collected. So that, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, it's the cyclical process of a research proposal. Like I said, you don't have to, these steps can move any other way. So you don't have to worry about whether you can go back or you can forward. It's allowed. It's an iterative process that you can work around with. Now, let's just look at some of these elements of a research proposal in a little bit of some details. When we look at the problem, for example, we would expect you to ask yourself, what exactly do you want to study? So you need to be clear in your mind that you want to study whatever the phenomenon that you want to study. And the next question you can ask yourself is, why is it worth studying for you? You know, why do you think this is worth studying? So you motivate basically your reasons why you believe it must be studied. Does the proposed study have any practical significance? In other words, is it going to add any value to any body of knowledge that you might be participating in? You know, is there any significance to it? And if so, what is it, for example? Does it contribute to the construction of social theories? In other words, is it going to give us more of the social theories or understanding that we may be lacking at a certain point? Or it's just, you know, study for fun? People don't just do research for nothing. They really do it for some reasons. I mean, can imagine that as a student at times you do it because you have to complete your academic program. With literature review, for example, you may want to ask the questions, you know, a number of them. What have others said about this topic? So that which is a problem that you are studying or that which you are investigating, you may want to know who and what have they said about the same thing that I'm doing now. Am I the first one? Am I just one of the many? And what did they say about it? What theories address it, and what do they say? What is it that they said before you on what you are saying? Because, you know, as I'm saying, it's very possible that when you go and do your study, you may find that there are people before you who might have conducted something similar. So it might as well be that you are not the first one to do it. And the question then is, what previous research exists? Is there any research previous that exists? And if so, what is it that it tells you, you know, as a researcher? Are there consistent findings, or do past studies disagree? You know, in other words, do they all agree when they were conducting investigation that is similar to what you're doing? Or, you know, what are the findings? Were they consistent, or were they forever changing, you know? So it's important for you to check all those kind of things. Are there flaws in the body of existing research that you think you can remedy? Because again, time moves. So in the process, you may pick up that there are flaws in the body of the existing research that you think you can rectify. Now, what about the subject for your study? Here we mean, you know, some units of analysis, for example. Whom will you study, or what will you study in order to collect data? What is it? You know, the last time I think we were talking about, I mean, you can study people, you can study things, objects, and what have you. What would you study in order to, what would you be studying in order to collect data? You need to identify in general and in theoretical terms, then in specific, more concrete terms. In more concrete terms, you identify who is available for your study and how will you reach them, you know, or how would you reach the object. It's very important to have that kind of a clear, you know, mind in your theoretical underpinning as to, will it be appropriate to select the sample? If so, how would you do that? If you've got 10 people, for example, it may be that you don't need a sample because you can just as well study all of them. But you need to have a clear plan in your research design as to how are you going to select a sample if you require a sample. It goes into your research design as well. If there's any possibility that your research will affect those you study, how will you ensure that the research does not harm them? So in other words, here it talks to issues around ethical consideration. How are you going to do that? You know, the ethical consideration, basically, you know. So how are you going to protect the subject of your study where there is a potential for harm? Measurements, for example. What are the key variables in your study? So in other words, what are you studying? I mean, you need to be very clear on the variables in terms of the dependent and the independent variables, and sometimes also the third variables in your study. How will you define and measure them? Because variables must be operationally defined and must be measured, for them to be considered scientific. Do your definitions and measurement method duplicate or differ from those of previous research on this topic? So in other words, are you defining the concept the same way as they were defined previously and using the same measurement methods that were used previously, or are yours different for your own study? So you need to be very clear, because we can use, for example, a wet teenage pregnancy. How you define it now may be similar or different from how it was defined 20, 30 years ago. Is it similar or is it the same? You need to be clear about that. If you have already developed your measurement device, for example, your questionnaire, your interviewing guide, or will you be using something previously developed by others? If so, it might be helpful that you attach a copy to your proposal. So in other words, are you going to come up with your own questionnaire, or are you going to come up with your own instrument of data collection, or you're going to use the one that might have been used previously before your time? And if so, it's always advisable that you attach everything, because remember, with research, it's about making sure that there's a clear understanding of the methodology that you are following to arrive at a particular conclusions. Data collection, for example, these are now the methodology. How will you actually collect data for your study? How are you going to collect data? Will you conduct an experiment, or is it going to be a survey? Will you undertake field research, or will you focus on the reanalysis of statistics already created by others? In other words, are you simply just going to get the statistics that is there, collected by others, and you collect that as your data, and you work around it as well? You need to know, because those are theoretical. There are some theoretical underpinnings to do exactly that. Perhaps you use more than one method. So in other words, maybe you're going to interview people, send questionnaires. So there could be mixed methods that you may consider as well. How are you going to do that? Is it one method, which is a questionnaire, comes back, analyzed, or is it a combination of different data collection methods? And when you move to analysis, then you indicate the kind of analysis you plan to conduct. So how are you going to analyze this? All these are things that you do at the beginning when you do a proposal, because you think through them, you read through them, and you build them into your own plan. You need to spell out the purpose and the logic of your analysis. In other words, why are you choosing this tool, this mechanism, this method over the others? So that needs to be spelled out at the proposal level. Are you interested in precise description? Remember, we said the purpose of research can either be descriptive, it can be explanatory, or it can be exploratory or predictive. So are you interested in precise description of whatever the problem that you are dealing with, or what have you? Do you intend to explain why things are the way they are? In other words, are you undertaking an explanatory research or not? Do you plan to account for variations in some quality? For example, why some students are more liberal than others? Those are the variations that you can look at to say, is that what you're planning to do? Variations in some quality, what possible explanatory variables will your analysis consider? How will you know if you've explained variations adequately? So in other words, if you're looking at variables called quality, the question is, how will you know if you have now explained variations adequately? So those are the questions that you build into your proposal as you ask yourself and you're considering proposal writing. The scheduling. It is important for anybody who's doing research to develop a schedule. It's often appropriate to provide a schedule for various stages of research. it provides guidance. It really guides you on what is important and what how long and how much you can go when you conduct your research, and each stage, for example, how long does each stage take of research. Even if you don't do this for the proposal, you have to do it for yourself. I mean, how long does it take for you to collect data? How long will it take for you to do literature review? How long does it take to analyze this, and how much time do you need to do a report? So you have to do it for yourself so that you begin to structure your own work. Unless you have a timetable for accomplishing the several stages of research and keeping track of how you're doing, you may end up in trouble. So in other words, you may put one day just for data collection, and you realize perhaps you need 2 months for it. So you might end up in trouble because you may think, oh, I actually need 2 days to write a report, and only to find that perhaps you need more than a week. You thought you can do an analysis in 2 hours, then you realize that you might actually need more time and expertise to do so. So it's important for you to just develop some kind of a schedule for yourself. It may not necessarily be something that is required in your proposal for academic purposes, but still it's advisable that you have a schedule, because then it sort of just help you to organize your work. The issue of a budget when you do research. When you ask someone to cover your research costs, you need to provide a budget that specifies where the money will go. I know that at times as students, you reckon that you don't always spend money in research because you registered for the module. But it's important to know that you are actually incurring some costs. I mean, right now, there are some issues around connections and connectivity costs and so on and so on. So you need to build that into your own budget, paper that you are going to use, and etc., etc. But for large, expensive projects, research projects, you need to include budgetary categories such as personnel. I mean, there are field workers that may be employed. There might be data analysts that may be roped in, and so on and so on. Issues around computers, issues around supplies, issues around telephones and postage, for example. I'm sure you've seen some self-stamped postages that when you receive a questionnaire from somebody, it gets attached for you. So because, I mean, nobody wants to go to a post office to go buy a stamp to send back a questionnaire that you as a researcher, you would like to get information and work on for your own purposes, for your own aim of your own research. So I'm sure that doesn't sound strange to you. It's a good idea to spend some time anticipating expenses such as your office supplies, your photocopying, your digital storage devices, your telephone calls, and transportation. These are things that you need to build into your budgetary consideration. They may not necessarily be relevant now in your research project that is for academic purposes, but you need to start already familiarizing yourself with some of those issues.
I have a question on the scheduling. Is that a schedule for the proposal, or is for the actual research that will be taking place? Because some of us were on proposal phase. So is it for the actual research that will engage next year, or it's for the proposal? That's my question that I have.
I just wanted to understand, what does a theoretical framework entail? How should one actually approach it? And also the distinction between what goes into it and also what goes into the literature review. And also maybe can touch on also the rationale of the research as well, as a topic in a proposal.
Thank you again, Doctor. So my comment was, besides people that I need to interact with regarding my research, besides UNISA personnel, if it's people outside of UNISA, and I make an example of a station commander or a lawyer.
Here you're talking about your subject of your study. Am I correct? In other words, you talk about your participants.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So my question is around support, maybe documentary support. For me, when I get there, at least it looks, legitimate.
Oh, I see.
Correct.
I see.
Yes.
But don't they give you? I'm not going to speak for the institution because I'm not familiar with their internal processes. But I take it that once they have granted you permission, you will have a permission letter that says your research has been approved. You can go and interview people, or whatever the subject at a particular place, and you still need to present that approval to them, to whoever is I mean, if it's an institution, they are not going to write to that institution. They are going to write to you as a researcher, isn't it? It will be you as a researcher who then take that permission to engage. Let's say it's a department of like courts, the head of the court or whoever. Is that will be my understanding. But you'll have a letter that allows you to do exactly that, except that the head of the court may want certain proofs from you. Isn't that? I mean, other students are welcome to share their understanding as well. Is that not how you'll do it?
I think, Professor, Doctor, from your answer, you provide a proper guidance, which I'm satisfied with that. Thank you. I don't want to hold the meeting. So
no, that's fine. No, it's helpful because it's important to know. Remember, we said in your sample, you need to know who your subjects are going to be. So your subject might require a different kind of entry into them, which might involve getting a permission letter, those kind of certified with the clearance, ethical clearances and all that. Can I just check? We can always come back to this when we deal with the research ethical issue, which we'll do just now, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
But let me hear, and I still have those questions that were raised, earlier. But there was an issue around your avenues, other than the library and your Google. For me, what you're saying is, are you asking the question to say, what are your sources? Because the library and all that are more where you get source of information, not necessarily where you interview your participants to your research. Would I be correct in that? So you can use the library, you can use public-private libraries, you can use Google Scholar, you can use other apps that your librarian can be able to guide you, which are scientific. But you can get other sources that you can think about. I can't think of any at the moment that you want to check. Is there any particular area of avenue that you want to check, if it's scientific and empirical, that you can use, or it was just a general question? I think it was still your question, Happy.
Yes, Doctor, it was. I think the one other thing that wanted me to raise this question, it was more on the fact when you told us about, and I've made notes here to say what others have done in comparison to what you are doing. So I need to study and do that research. So I think I got a bit overwhelmed as to where do I get such?
Okay. Maybe what I meant there was just to say whether you read books or journals or.
Okay, my question is under literature review. So I'm doing my chapter 2. Currently, I'm doing my chapter 2. So I just wanted to find out whether are we guided by something to structure our literature review? And another question is it possible that one maybe you can't find the recent articles or articles under your topic? Is it possible to get such problem? Maybe if you're searching for relevant articles to your topic, and you find that they are old. The previous ones are older. Maybe they are from 2000 or 1990 something. And another question is, how long must the articles be? Maybe we must start reading from 2010 or something like that. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay. Those are the difficult ones. All of you, remember, you have your respective promoters or supervisors that you work with. So it's always going to be no right or wrong answer that we are going to give. We're just going to give some guidelines or principles, because different institutions, different discipline or program will require different standards. However, when you do your literature review, there's no standard that has been set, except that at different levels they'll tell you how many sources you should consult. So they might say to you, consult, let's say, for example, 200 sources as an example. So then that means it's all type of sources. Remember, they are not saying this kind of a source or that kind of a source. So it's all sources. So they may have a number where they said this number, not necessarily pages, but number in terms of how many sources you should consult. That's the first thing. The second consideration is, if you're saying that the sources are old or they are very older, and you have done the right searches, there's nothing wrong in saying that in your literature review. There's nothing wrong in saying, in your literature review article, that there are few or they are older sources and they are not new sources. You've done the search. So in other words, you've done the review, the literature review, but you must have used all the different scientific engines and maybe even making use of a librarian to that effect, to ensure that you are able to put that in your statement. So you are allowed to say that that most of that actually is one of the reasons. Oh, okay, but you see the true that. But remember, you're asking a difficult question because you know something. We don't know where you get the idea of the theoretical framework, right? So
okay, let me explain it this way. I heard from you that when you're talking about literature review, you touched on that we need to put some theories on there.
Yeah,
that's why.
Theories or something.
So there's also a standalone aspect in your research proposal that speaks to a theoretical framework. So now, if you touch theoretical framework theories on your literature review, then again you have to come back and then delve deeper on that under your theoretical framework. I'm not quite sure that's how you should approach it.
Okay, let's save time this way. Let's see if this will assist, right? You're welcome to indicate if it assists or it doesn't. When you have a problem, when you start with a problem that you have, let's say, I can't think of a problem now. You're going to have to read. There are some theories around that which you are studying, isn't it? There's some theoretical underpinnings. It's not a new thing. I'm not talking about the findings by others. For example, we've got behavioral theories. We've got there are some theories that underpin any issue that you are dealing with, isn't it?
That's correct.
So in other words, you're going to read. Somebody who was talking about the psychodynamics yesterday to say, no, you read around the psychodynamics, but that's a big term. So I may also then read from a social theory, from a child development processes, and so on. So there are different theories that, depending on what you are studying, because every discipline has some kind of a theoretical underpinnings. Because remember, as you're gathered here now, students, you are studying different disciplines, and each discipline has got its own theoretical framework. Now, when you go read something, you're going to read about not only the research that was done, but you're also going to read about the theories that are applicable in that space. For example, like if you study children, you're going to read more about child development and cognitive development and all those. Those are theoretical underpinnings that tells you at what stage is the child, at what level, isn't it? So those are the theoretical issues that you need to familiarize yourself with as you do any study. So there is a theory. So every subject or every discipline has theories linked to it. But I don't want to be specific and say that theory for that discipline or that, because then I might just miss the point there. But the literature review is two different aspects. When you study research, you're going to get a lot of theories around qualitative and quantitative research. Those are theoretical. You should expect that in when you study the subject research. And the other question that was asked earlier, I think it was by Believe, he was asking about the scheduling, whether this scheduling is mainly in relation to a proposal writing or in relation to the actual conduct of the research. I'm hesitant to answer it, but I can try to say, for me, it might appear in both. Because when you are going to do a proposal, you might then say, how long will I take to develop a proposal? But also when you do research, that proposal will have already started giving you terms and timelines that can be applied when you do research. So it can apply to both, Believe, if I got your question right earlier. But in the main, what I'm saying is that it may not necessarily be required now for when you submit your proposal to your promoter, but I don't see how a promoter will penalize you, if you make attempts to develop a schedule, because it has got no, it doesn't harm the proposal. I don't know whether Believe is still on the platform. If he is, I hope I tried to just, in the interest of time, summarize that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I'm still on the platform.
We've spoken about this the last time, but it's important to repeat it at this level, because when you're going to conduct your research, you need to then be able to say at what stage are you in terms of the logic. Remember, we said induction and deduction are radically different. Induction deals with drawing conclusions from data. Here you rely on data. So you use data to make conclusion, nothing else but data or observation. So it is actually, this one is actually considered the logical method upon which science is based. So with this kind of induction, you move from the particular to the general. So you start by using this particular data here, and then you then make general inferences about it. So here with the induction, you observe a sample, and then you draw conclusions about the larger population. So here you have a sample, and then you use the sample observation to draw conclusions. We're going to talk about it a lot more, the inductive and deductive, at some point, because you will realize that there's a principle upon which you can generalize your findings. One of the principles at which we are able to generalize findings is to do with the random sampling. If your sample has been random, and because then it's a representative sample of the larger population. So in other words, if the sample represents exactly the larger population by all respects, then you can generalize for the broader population. So we generalize if only we've used random sampling that is representative of the population. What about the deductive? Deductive logic, here then you're really basing your argument on a hypothesis. So you go out, you've got an assumption, and you go and you test it. So it actually begins with the why and moves to the whether, you know. So in other words, here, you start with a general view, and then you go and you test it, and you come back and you make your conclusion. So basically, it's almost like it's the opposite. So it moves from the general to the specific. Remember, the other one is the other way around, that you move from the particular to the general. So this one, at least you say all UNISA students are brilliant, for example. Now you go out, and because you shall have defined the brilliance and in terms of the elements of it and so on, you go out, you test it, and you come back, you tell us whether indeed, in terms of your own definition, are they brilliant. So that's the movement. That's what differentiates the two. Now let's just quickly look at the ethics of research. There has been some few questions that have already been asked on this, and I'm glad that we have touched on it briefly. Now, when selecting and involving participants, some of you are already doing this work, and therefore it's going to be very interesting to see how you engage with it. You must ensure that full information about the purpose and the uses of participants' contribution is given. So when you get into this space in terms of research ethics, you select participants that are going to be involved in your research. You need to ensure that you give them full information, you are honest, and you keep them informed about the expectations. So you honestly engage them, and you tell them why you are doing that which you are doing. You do not put pressure on them to speak, and you encourage them to keep confidential what they hear during the meeting. So in other words, when we participate in a research project, we need to be reminded that whatever we discuss in that space or what we are hearing in that environment is confidential. And you, as a researcher, you've got the responsibility to anonymize data from the group. So what it means that when you anonymize data, you are actually making the data so anonymous that people should not be able to identify the sources by just going through it. There's a principle of voluntary participation and informed consent. Here, this is a major tenet, by the way, for research ethics, that experimental participation must be voluntary. So people participate in research voluntarily, and no one should be forced to participate. When research involves public documents, like your public records, statistics that human beings have previously created, such as your birth certificates, your newspaper articles, your internet websites, such are generally considered to be fair game for research investigation. So they're public records. Those ones are treated differently because they're already out there in the public domain. And people who are recruited for participation in a research study should be told the nature of your study that you are going to conduct, and they must be given choices of whether to participate or not to participate. So remember again, the example that was used earlier about the lecturer or the clerks and so on, it does not necessarily bear that when you have the permission, your sample are literally just going to participate without them having choices. You can still have a sample and people say, oh, sorry, I'm not interested. They should be told that if they agree to participate, they have the right to withdraw from the study at any given time. There was a question earlier on that was asked about whether you can pay the participant or not. Remember, there's a very fine line between inducement and thanking people for contributing, for participating. When you induce them, it's like when you use money to recruit people to participate in your study, that might be problematic ethically, as opposed to just, giving out a token of appreciation for people when they participate, which is something that you need to build into your proposal up front as to, are you going to give something, as a token, or, otherwise it's just participation voluntarily. Now, increasingly, we see that one of the ethical norms of voluntary participation and the no harm to participant is formalized in a form of what they call informed consent. This is very common now as a norm, because in there researchers spell out the voluntary participation project quite literally. So people do sign those kind of forms, which they call informed consent. The principle of protection from harm or no harm to the participant, very important for researchers, because the researcher should not expose research participants to unnecessary physical or psychological harm. So in other words, when I come to participate in any of your research, I mustn't leave there with any kind of harm, whether physical or psychological. When a study involves human beings, the general rule of thumb is that the risk involved in participating in a study should not be appreciatively greater than the normal risk of day-to-day living. So people participate in your study voluntarily, they come to you voluntarily, and therefore they must not suffer any kind of harm. Now, participants should not risk losing life, nor should they be subjected to unusual stress or embarrassment, loss of self-esteem. Because remember, depending on what kind of research are you dealing with, some research can lead to death, depending on the sensitivities, because people study all kinds of things. So it is advisable that you familiarize yourself with the principle of protection from harm or no harm to the participant, because people can lose life. I mean, you can imagine if you are studying people who are whistleblowing and doing all sorts of surveillances and some dangerous work, and you want to find out few things about the work that they do. So that is quite important, because it might bring harm to them, inadvertently. So you need to be able to read that. Any study that involves human beings must respect the rights of the participant to privacy. So people have got a right to privacy, and under no circumstances should your report as a researcher, either oral or written, be presented in such a way that people become aware of how a particular participant has responded. Now, you can just imagine if, at the workplace, at the different places where you are, and you're interviewing people, and people are now beginning to, identify who could have responded in a particular way. Unless, of course, the participant has specifically given you permission in writing for this to happen, that I don't mind. I'm willing to share this information with you, and therefore, in that case, you've got you've received sort of a permission to publish in that way. So generally, a researcher must keep the nature and the quality of the participants' performance strictly confidential. So there's no sharing of people's identities, people's information outside the research space, because then their information must be completely confidential. The other principle, in the research ethics is honesty. As a researcher, you must report the findings in a complete, honest fashion without misrepresenting what they've done or intentionally misleading others about the nature of their findings. So you have to be honest in how you report the findings. Under no circumstances should a researcher fabricate data to support a particular conclusion, no matter how seemingly noble that conclusion might be. Sometimes as a researcher, you feel that you want participants to go in a certain directions and they go in a different directions. So that information has to be reported in as honestly as possible, and you are not going to fabricate your data to support your conclusion as a researcher. You can raise your own issues as long as you are clearly indicating that those views are purely yours, are not necessarily the views from the data that you've collected. So because if you fabricate data to support a particular conclusion, really, that action constitutes scientific fraud, plain and simple. So basically, you are you're committing fraud, which is scientific, because you're misleading, science in a way. So that's something to avoid. Deception, for example, deceiving people is unethical. Deception within social research needs to be justified by compelling scientific or administrative concerns. In an event that there might be a need for deception to be committed, you need to be guided by what are the scientific or the administrative concerns. As I said, in some instances, you will be required to interview people whose identities are not to be revealed. Then you need to look at what are the scientific or the administrative concerns that you need to consider, and all that has to be backed up by the theoretic. By scientific persuasions, not simply because you think it must be done in the way that you want it done. The other principle is anonymity and confidentiality. We spoke about confidentiality, but just a re-emphasis that the protection of the subject's interest and well-being is the protection of their identity, especially when you conduct survey research. You need to make sure that you protect people's identity. If revealing their survey responses will injure them in any way, adherence to this norm becomes even more important. So in other words, if by revealing their name or their identity, it might lead to them being injured, it's even more urgent that you adhere to the principle of anonymity and confidentiality. So anonymity is achieved in a research project when neither the researcher nor the reader of the findings can identify a given response within a given respondent. So if in reading your findings and your research report, I'm not able to identify you as a respondent or whoever the respondent is, but I'm able to still relate to the data, that is what we talk about when we say we've achieved anonymity. So a research report or project guarantees confidentiality when the researcher can identify a given person's response but promises not to do so publicly. So it is important, ladies and gentlemen, to remember that in all research processes, you need to be able to protect the identity of the participants that are involved in your research project. Now, let me just pause here and ask a question. Currently in the country, we do have a POPIA Act, which has just been recently made public, and I think it's a law now. How do you think this research ethics principles square up or compare to the legislation, that the POPIA legislation? For those of you who might have already gone through it or who might already be affected by it, because I know that UNICEF is doing everything possible to adhere to that legislation in many ways. So how do you think these principles of the research ethics compare to the POPIA Act? Let me see if I can pick up hands. You can talk if you are ready, just to share some ideas on the POPIA Act. Do you think there's any relationship? Do they relate, or there's no relation at all? Let's see. MC, what do you think? I see MC. You can go ahead, Tutse.
Yes, there is a relationship. For me, I see the act more emphasizing on protecting personal is in support of the ethics. So for me, I interpret the act as an emphasis of what was already there. So I think the two are interrelated, and they give a good support in terms of protecting the personnel that you have. So they are related.
Okay. Yeah, that's a view. Anybody else in the platform?
Hi, Dr. Mashabela.
Yes, please proceed, Armstrong.
They are actually related. Overall, the POPIA Act is the overarching of what actually needs to be said. So from there, the ethics that are in ethical considerations, they need to be actually within the parameters of the POPIA Act. So that's how I look at it, because of the nature of how one should conduct him or herself as a researcher in terms of protecting the participants, information and all things that speaks to information.
Do you? Yes, I hear both of you. How, for now, in terms of your own life as students at UNISA, how do you see it being applied? If you've been able to see any of those, because I know that Godfrey is struggling with that legislation all the time in their own space, to try to make sure that they implement it. As students, how do you think it has improved your life, or it has hampered your life, if any? What you are saying, it's Armstrong and Tute is correct, but I just want to see whether in real life you're feeling anything about it, good or bad. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. Research can be good or it can be bad. It doesn't matter. Remember, this data, we are not manipulating it for our own purposes. So you say what you have to say. Anybody? Basnati, what do you say about the legislation and how you feel it in real life, as you relate to UNISA, if it does affect you at all?
Doctor, with your permission, if I may take a chance here.
Go ahead. Yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
So in terms of personal life and maybe also work related, and just in general, for me,
Yeah.
It further, again, don't want to plagiarize, but if I may use one of my colleagues' term here, it further emphasizes on the right to privacy. And I think what will convince me with this POPIA Act, if we can see evidence of the right to privacy being executed in real time. For an example, or in simple terms, I live in Johannesburg, and there is this, for lack of a better word, people will steal your identity document or ID number to do all kinds of criminal acts, or you get married to someone that you don't even know. I think for me, once, and I'm sure there's a provision in the Act to say, if you are able to produce someone else's private information, like your ID numbers, etc., you should also, or that should also be accompanied with a proof or consent from that individual. if I make sense. So for me, yes, POPIA Act is there, as my colleague said. It's just an emphasis of what should have happened, but it was not law. For me or maybe the lack thereof, is to further emphasize or work on, if I were to produce your details to my colleagues, the law or the POPIA Act should also provide a provision to say who's the receiver of that information. The first question should be asked, where did you get it, and where is the concern? To also maybe further go to such an extent of contacting the individual. Again, I make a simple practical example. We know most, I'd like to say private companies, they've got this view of employees must not share their pay slips. I know for a fact, if you take a case maybe of unfair discriminatory in terms of your payments or pay or salaries, if you have as part of your evidence other pay slips of your colleagues who you compare yourself to, the commissioner will definitely ask you whether you did get consent from those individuals, and it needs to be in written, or those individuals at some times or at some point they will have to be contacted to also agree on record that yes, I have given this document to this individual on this date and I consented to that effect. If I make sense, Doctor. Thank you.
Yeah, you do. No, you do. Now, it has come to a point where you can't even share telephone numbers, email addresses of people. And I think that's why when you're invited in here, sometimes you can just see the name and there are no other details. I mean, it used to be so easy for anybody to say, oh, here is the number, I can pass it. Now it's like even the numbers you have to get permission and so on and so on. But I see some hands. Maybe these are the people who want to help us with just understanding this POPIA Act a lot. I'm sure it's affecting business people, especially those who are in telesales, a lot more. Because when somebody phones you, where did you get my number? That's the first thing that people are recently going to ask you, because you need permission to get somebody else's number and to give somebody else's number now, as it was not the case before. I would just assume that some sizwe akana problem when I pass on the number. Now you with the new legislation you can't. Now that is in research ethically, that is what we are talking about, that you're not simply going to assume that simply because you interviewed people and they gave you data, therefore they allow and they agree with you to do as you wish with their data. You need to still make sure you protect their identity, their privacy, and you don't harm them in any way. And if they are the ones who come and say, look, what you have done is harmful to me, unfortunately you'll have to accept that. And now it's making research even more interesting, because I think the level and the standard is too high, if you like. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on any of the things that we have raised now, before we just wrap up the day session? I don't see a hand here. Yes, please continue.
The POPIA Act, it's quite interesting, particularly in the call center industry.
Yeah, I can imagine, yes.
So there's two things. It's the technology to, you've got this true caller, which just looks everybody. So the use of technology in the POPIA Act, right? That's the first one. But also the call center, I mean, the repercussions, what repercussions do you have? You just drop the phone, right? Because you're still getting being lambasted or badgered by people. But here's the the flip coin of that is we talk about people not sharing your personal information, yet each company is declaring dividends of what a CEO earns. Where do you draw the line? Because that's as personal as you get, isn't it?
Yes.
So where are the exemptions? Even in government, you have to do an annual reporting. You say, Andre Eskom, what is his bonus? Or the gentleman from the mining company, he gets a bonus. And then it's got plastered all over the news, and nobody thinks POPIA Act.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's quite interesting. I just thought that I'd highlight that.
That's a very interesting observation, also, that you are putting out there for somebody to then take us up on the POPIA Act. Well, who said you must talk about my 300 million, for example?
Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting. But I think there will be the pros and cons of the legislation, and I'm not sure whether it's taking us forward or it's taking us backwards or it's protecting us. I don't know. I think that's a subject for futurists, but it's an interesting observation out there. Charles, I think you also want to have a bite. Let's allow you. Maybe Nancy has sort of triggered some brainwave now.
Oh, it's actually Charlene. Doctor, what I wanted to find out, if you're a student and you're in the middle of your research and you happen to lose the data and you have not yet anonymized your data, so the names and whatever of of the people that you've interviewed, and it's a sensitive issue that you are researching. If you happen to lose that data and it lands in the wrong hands, what are the repercussions, or what happens to you, or what are the steps that you need to take in order to rectify the situation with the varsity and the people involved?
Sure, that's a tough one. This is a tough one. It's almost like when you say some of these huge databases that I mean, we recently just heard that there was data that was lost by banks and
exactly.
And
they have to make it public. And
I think the first there is an information regulator in the country. Information regulator that needs to know. I mean, there was an issue regarding the hacked system in the Department of Justice, where there are people in maintenance and people whose details may be compromised and so on. So I'm not sure from the varsity side how they handle it. But I'm sure there are one or two people here who can give us some ideas. However, it's always going to be important, if you know the people that gave you the information, to communicate with them as well, so that at least they are on the know. Because remember, the kind of information that you collect from them, you collect it in good faith. So some might still be saying, well, look, I'm willing to give you the same information, or you can come and collect the same information. So it's advisable to go back to the participants from time to time. In any event, in research, you are also required or expected to give them feedback when you have completed your work as well. I mean, it's just courtesy as well, that look, I collected information on X. Now I've made it, and the info, here is the report. You're welcome to go through it, and so on and so on, if you want to. I know it's not always an easy thing, because once you've collected data, you go through the stresses of analysis, and by the time you finish doing a report, you no longer want to see that work anywhere else. So yeah, it's a tough one, Charlene. I don't think we can give you a right answer. I think we can just talk about those principles at the moment. But I'm sure the institution and your promoter will be able to guide you much more concretely than what we can do here. You can just share that information. It's almost like also, backing it up, and now you lose your computer, you lose your laptop, which God forbid gets stolen, and all of a sudden, people can have access to a whole range of data. So yeah, it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting discussion to raise. And maybe can we say when we discuss data collection and data analysis, we can bring it back, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you.
Because it can talk to how we back up data. I mean, some people lose up their backup. They've got the data, but they backed it up on a USB. Now the USB is gone, but I mean, USB is not even password protected, for example. So I get the USB and I've got data. Because remember, in the current state we are in, they say data is the new oil. So somebody get your USB, they've got the new oil. If it's sitting with huge amount of data. So I beg you to remind us to talk about it when we deal with data collection and how the data protection, as well.
May I ask a question, sir? And
Yes,
please bear with me. So forgive me, I'm ADD. I have ADD, so sometimes when I miss the beginning, there's like a blurriness. So right now, year one, we are doing all of we're like really hustling to push and get very fantastic marks. And then comes this course on research, which we are looking at, and I'm not sure if it's in year two that we start our research. While we are busy running around right now, when do we start the blueprint of what we are going to do? Where do we start that mapping? Because right now, the MBL for someone like me is at a point where I'm absorbing all the information, and I've got all this literature that I try and keep up with my esteemed colleagues, brilliant colleagues, by the way. And now comes this course, this lesson on research. I need you to map it for me like a puzzle, because at this point where we are at, we're chasing exam, we're chasing semester 2, we're panicking about numerical numbers that we have to do. We're chasing the elective. Somewhere along the line, and I think it's the gentleman that is supporting you, I think there needs to be like a clinical map that gives us a framework of, once you've done X, this is where you need to be by semester 2. This is where you start compiling your research and you're finding the interest. Because right now it's like ESCOM, it goes on and off. And I really, because I think we don't want to be found wanting that, okay, now we have to start the research. I just
okay. Look, I can't answer you convincingly because I'm not inside the institution in terms of their curriculum. But what I can try to say to you is, I have a group of students who've got a program or a module called research in different areas, like doing masters, doctoral, and so on. Now, some of them are required to develop a proposal. I'm not sure whether the proposal, they must do it now in June or later in the year. Now, it is only when you've got your proposal done, your research proposal done in full, that you'll be then able to undertake physical research. So some are required once, to get the proposal approved, because the proposal, when it's approved, then it gives you the right to go out there and conduct physically research. So I think it's different. I've got a portfolio of students here. Some have their dissertations that are required for them to go out and do research. Some are just doing it as a module so that they can do they score their points and leave. Others are doing their thesis as PhD students, and therefore they are required to develop a proposal. So they've been guided on a proposal preparation and the entire technical research work. So the whole year, what we will be doing is, then we are going to be taking chapter by chapter and really biting this whole big thing called research gradually. So that is why when we're talking now, people are at different stages. I mean, other people are saying, what about the theory? Others are saying, what about literature review? Other people talk about what about the data collection and so on. So at some point, the puzzle, because you say this is a puzzle, the puzzle will only connect as to what are you doing and at what level of research or what is required of you in terms of research. But I'm sure what the tutorial officer can do or will do is that he will then map up for you as to what will we be doing in the subsequent program, because there's an expectation that by the end of the year we should have covered research in such a way that all students that have participated in this program are research literate, and they are also able to undertake research, or they've undertaken their own research guided by this intervention. I have not answered you, but I think I've tried to just give you the broad strokes about it.
Thank you, Doc. I think you've given us, yes, it's very broad. I think maybe it's just because there's a lot of not inconsistency, a lot of erraticness happening within the environment of UNISA. I'm not sure who's in it from the admin staff, if they've returned.
The gentleman, that gentleman Pafudi, please. I'm also available to do one-on-ones. He's the one who's going to do the scheduling, but he's the person that is in charge of this. His link is the link between you and myself in terms of this work. Both in a group, but also at an individual level, if there's any assistance that is required.
Super. We'll reach out. We'll reach out, because I think the glue needs to start fitting. Because at some point we almost need to consciously, unconsciously prepare that we have to do research, and not just as a course or a module, but as part of we need to start finding the end point and how do we get there, because we don't want to wake up and say now, okay, Mr. Maz, you've now passed. And then says, okay, I'm done. But then this is actually, you've got a thesis and the dots are not fitting.
We just want you, well, from my side, and again, we will step off this point just now. From my side, I just want to make sure that we prepare all of you to really be future researchers in whichever areas that you choose to go into, because then the basics would have been there for all of you to be familiar with, the extent to which you are going to excel on them. Okay, it looks like I've lost everyone. I hope I'm still audible. I see some.
You're still audible.
Oh, am I still? Okay. Yeah, so if we can, out of this group of you, the 21 of you, and we can make some students to at least proceed and excel in their research spaces in whichever way, we will be quite happy, because then that's what UNISA has asked me to do, and in working with you and with the tutorial officer. But let's just wrap it up, because I think I was trying to make up for the lost time and see as to what we have already achieved so thus far. Just the points to keep in mind, really, is that we have just covered the research processes and the steps that we shared just now. We have looked at the elements of the research, from the aim up to the report that you have to write. We tried to speak to the inductive and the deductive logic, and we also look at just briefly, or maybe interestingly, on the research ethics going forward. So this really concludes the work that we have done today. And I think what we will do, and feel free if you want certain topics to be covered to make those suggestions, because we are rolling ahead with the understanding of what we want to cover, but we also want to know if we are addressing the issues that students and the work that you're doing is also taken care of, so that we don't leave anybody behind. So that, to me, concludes the session for today.